Austin, Texas. Jean and Dave roll down the sidewalk in electric wheelchairs. Worldwide, Jean paraglide, explore with interviewing our 2D2. Jean Rogers. And Dave Gabaron.
Jean and Dave Show.
Disruption Part 1 of 2. TheJeanandDaveShow.com. A project of Art Spark, Texas. Sparking the creative in everyone.
Hi, I'm Gene.
And I'm Dave.
And you're watching
the Gene and Dave Show. Oh man, Gene, we've got a great show in store for people today. We're going to really talk to a few of our friends. What are you doing?
What do you mean?
Well, you keep interrupting me.
Well, our show is all about interruption.
No, it's about disruption, not interruption.
Well, what's the difference?
Disruption is the change of course, a new way of doing or viewing events or products. A good example is the iPhone. It totally changed the way we use smartphones. Disruption in this case is a good thing. Well, I guess it can be a bad thing too. COVID-19 is also a disruption.
Oh, okay. So today we'll be talking about disruption in art.
Well, not exactly. We'll be talking about using art as a medium to create disruption.
Ah, okay.
Right, Celia?
Well, hello. Thank you for bringing me in and getting me involved in this. I've been thinking a lot about disruption over these past few months and really looking at people that I know in my life and people that I've worked with over the years. And how have they changed the trajectory of art and disability? And we've done a lot with Actual Lives and with other organizations that really have addressed the stereotype and the perceptions of people with disabilities. And we look a lot at the different models that we've gone through over the decades, really, in terms of how we've dealt with people with disabilities, locking them away, then saying, well, maybe you can come out, but you have to be cared for. You're fragile. You have to be protected. Oh, no, you can't live on your own. And so art has been really kind of involved in shattering some of those barriers, right alongside our warriors that are out there, fighting for disability rights and taking us up to the passage of the ADA, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary. Happy birthday, ADA. And I got to thinking about a person that I had worked with and have been working with now for 20 years, and that's Terry Galloway. And Terry is a unique artist. She is deaf, and she went deaf very early on in her life, but she always wanted to be in the theater. If you know anybody that is in the theater, that is in their blood. They just can't think of doing anything else, and that was Terry. But she had to really shatter a lot of stereotypes and be what I call a disruptor in order to get anywhere. And so when I look at the body of her work, of course, I'm always drawn to the film that she made 20 years ago called The Miracle Worker. Now, we all know about the story of Helen Keller. We all know that she went deaf and blind as a very, very young child, and that she was a real little hellion because of that, and because she couldn't see and she couldn't hear. And nobody could really work with her. But then along came a teacher, Annie Sullivan, and Annie was able to, through her own methods, tame, as they say, Helen Keller. And Helen went on to be a major speaker, you know, a role model for many, many people, is put up on a pedestal, is really respected by many people. And Annie Sullivan was always referred to as the miracle worker because what she did was a miracle. And so it wasn't really a miracle. She just had techniques that she was able to use and determination and fortitude that she was going to get through to this young woman.
Which
And
you never really get from watching the original film.
what do you get? Yeah, when you watch the film, what do you get, Dave?
Yeah, it's a miracle. Wow, just something absolutely magic happens.
Right. She takes a water pump and she pumps a little water over Helen's hands, and it's a miracle. She knows how to say water. She understands that this nonsense that's going on in her hand is finger spelling, you know? And so it's all a miracle. So 20 years ago, Terry made a film, The Miracle Worker, where she sort of disrupted our vision of what the miracle worker was and how she did what she did. And it still is a bit disruptive today, but really when you look back at it, it really did change the course of how people looked at Annie Sullivan and the work she did, and also changed the course of how people were regarding people who are deafblind, people with disabilities. They were never looked at the same again by anybody who actually, I think, saw that movie. Now, I can't speak for every person, but I think you'll be able to judge for yourselves in a little while when you actually see this movie.
So in order to start this disruption conversation, you actually asked another organization to chime in, DisArt.
Yes.
Kind of just teamed them up with Terry and let them go at it.
Well, actually, what happened was I had been contacted by the folks at DisArt because they were going to be coming to Austin for South by Southwest.
Which was canceled because of the COVID-19.
Yes.
Yeah, Gene and I were supposed to be there like every year.
I know, and that's how this whole thing started, was because Gene was like, "Oh, we don't have a show." I said, "Okay, I'll bring you a show." So DisArt were coming to town with a group out of England called Drag Syndrome, and I just started talking with Chris and Jill, and I thought, oh, these people are pretty rad. I want to really kind of work with them. So I started talking with them, especially when South by got canceled. I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's do what you were going to do by bringing Drag Syndrome to Austin. What is that going to look like? And we had a couple of conversations, video conversations, and then I invited Gene to come to the call, and the next thing I knew, we were making a Gene and Dave show with Chris and Jill from Jill. Exactly, and here we are. So we started out first talking about how are we going to feature Drag Syndrome in the DisArt's experience, which was very disruptive to their town in Michigan, and then we started talking about, well, maybe we should talk about some other organization, and Chris and Jill had just finished interviewing Terry and Donna for their podcast. So we were like, oh, well, they're the perfect team to come on and join us in this with our merry band of mischief makers here.
So we throw DisArt and the Mickey Faust clubs into a Zoom room, and we get total chaos, which is what you're about to see.
Yep. Well, it's controlled chaos thanks to the fine editing skills of Dave and his partner, Gene.
I'm glad you got the order right, Celia. So what do you say? Let's turn it over to Chris with DisArt and Jill, and let's check out this interview, shall we?
Great.
Well, thanks for joining us, everybody, today. This is a really exciting opportunity for DisArt and the Mickey Faust Club to be together and to spend some time together talking about disruption. And of course, you know, we find ourselves in a cultural moment of disruption right now because of COVID and also because of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so there's a lot of disruption right now. Is that right? I mean, really, there's a lot going on. But, you know, one of the things that we wanted to talk about right away up front is the fact that disruption is part of everyday life. In other words, it's a natural part. And I think that that's something that we all agreed on, especially within the disability culture that we're all talking about today. Maybe for Donna and Terry, this idea of disruption as being a natural part of the disabled life. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting because I think disability itself is a disruption, you know, and most people think of it as an unwelcome disruption to life, you know, but as we're finding out and as we're postulating, as we're claiming, people with disabilities are claiming, is that no, it's an excellent disruption. You know, disability of all sorts, of all kinds, and of all means is brings people's attention to what they're talking about as being normal. You know, what they're talking about as being natural, because disruption, as you say, is a part of natural life. I mean, we have, well, hurricanes, earthquakes, mudslides, and disability. I'm going to put us right up there with that.
Yeah, right,
you know,
right.
Because I think it's important to claim the power of that, because there is a power in being disrupted in that way. And people always talk about disruption, again, as a bad thing. But as we're seeing, and it can be, the COVID, of course, is just an absolute terror. It's an absolute terror, but it's reminding people, or should be reminding people, about what we actually are and how susceptible we are to these things. Not just people with disabilities, not just people who are aging, not just people who have diabetes. No, these are all of these different kinds of things that make us vulnerable, but how we as a species we are vulnerable, all of us. You know, and that vulnerability is part of disruption, and that's also part of what's supposed to make us philosophical, poetic, compassionate thinking creatures. You know, so for me, the terror of COVID, but also I want to say, murder is such a disruption, and the systematic murder. And that we are seeing in our society, this in which it seems like the ancestors of slave owners have taken over, the kind of sadism and that about the lives, Black lives, so much in particular, not mattering. They don't matter. They're not considered to be lives. And Chris, that's something that we as people with disabilities can so identify with, because we were also put on the trash heap of history. And some of us, from the day we were born, were not considered to be human and not considered to have souls. You know, and it was a disruption to those kinds of people who made those kind of pronouncements when the people without soul suddenly spoke up.
Well, and I find it really interesting too that both of our organizations are leading into the idea of disruption as part of our political work, right? So if disruption is part of the personal life of the disabled person, what DisArt and Mickey Faust has done is, I think, is take that disruption and turned it into a format for education, right? And a format for new thinking. And that's certainly one of the reasons why, we have done some of the things that we've done as an organization, certainly what you guys have done too, and what we'll look at today. Jill, what is what do you think in terms of disruption and DisArt's work?
I think that we started off as an organization that didn't really fully understand the power of disruption and the power that disruption has to generate conversations until we brought in Drake syndrome from the UK. And it was at that moment when we had these intersections and conversations about agency and disability and sexuality and gender identification and civil rights that we realized how important art as a disruptor is in our culture and in our community. And so it's now become central to our strategic plan and our work as an organization moving forward, that our work has to address issues. And in order to address issues and make change, we don't know how else to do it except to disrupt. But because we've all been influenced all our lives. And if you don't put a jolt to it, I mean, that's why the riots with the George Floyd, in response to George Floyd's death are working, because they're disrupting and they're making all of us pause and think, what have we come to believe is true, right? And how might that have been misguided?
So for us, disruption for DisArt came a little later, but maybe Donna and Terry, if you guys would talk a little bit about whether, on the outside, disruption seems to be at the heart of what Mickey Faust does, but maybe you guys could talk a little bit about that. Was that intentional?
I'm kind of struck by being at writers' meetings, and and typically we do 2 to 3 original productions every year. Okay, so it's all original material. And I'm always sort of struck at writers' meetings when people say, well, is that Faustian? And again, the company is Mickey Faust, and the question is that Faustian? And I think, well, what does that mean? And sometimes I do think it is a kind of dark humor that we share very much with sort of the crypt community of humor. So even though we're tackling many other subjects, there was a musical comedy about rape last fall, okay? But it was indeed Faustian because the personal is political, and we were trying to disrupt narratives.
From the day we awoke, we had a bucket of tequila and margaritas, and a bunch of us just got a little tipsy, and we were bored, and we said, well, we want to do something here. And so we're in the Bible Belt. Tallahassee is a very liberal, it's like the Berkeley of Florida, of the South, but we're in the Bible Belt. And so almost anything we would do would be disruptive. But we started right out the chute. We started with a lot of kind of particularly queer disruption. One of the, in part because I'm queer and I'm deaf, and Donna and I are queer, I'm deaf, and that became almost kind of the central core. Although what's so interesting to me, I was very deferential about my own disability, my own deafness, but not about other people's. Marianne Ward, who had neurofibromatosis, and what that is, it's that the tumors grow, and they grew along her spine. And she used she used a power chair, but she had been a beach bunny, and she had been in theater, and she loved to do kind of like snarky little skits. And she came to see Faust. And then one of our Faustketeers, Donna Malinkovich, went up and said, well, why aren't you going to join us? And she said, well, how in the hell can I get on stage? And we're going, how is she going to get on stage? So we built a ramp. And that was kind of the beginning of our realization. We started off being disruptive in ways we didn't even mean to be disruptive. But we were also a queer organization in a place that was liberal, but still had a lot of queer bias. Just a lot of queer bias. And particularly from churchgoers, because there's a big church-going community here, a lot of bias. We were known as that, people were not pleasant about it.
I think disruption, it again, we're saying that it has this ability to stop a sort of flow of ideas. It certainly is a great way to fight ableism, and that's what's been really important for us. But I tend to think that disruption can also be quite mundane. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to hear from Jill about this too. But we are disruptive in almost any environment we're in. And so when Jill and I show up for a meeting in an office, because we do consulting work too, it's amazing to me how just the mere presence, right, of us in an office that hasn't dealt with disability before,
Yes.
right, that just our being is disruptive.
Yes.
I don't know, Jill, you want to chat about that a little bit?
Yes.
I think that's what Terry and Donna, you were referencing in your early days of the mere presence of different bodies and lifestyles was naturally disruptive to the normal ideas of how people live and work.
But I want to say, Chris, about and Jill, about the whole idea of just being a disruption. Sometimes when Faust, for instance, would join in the queer pride parades or something like that, that you would see they're not expecting people in chairs, to be trans. They're not expecting to see people with CP be supporters of gays. They're not people, even in the most more radical situations, you can see it's the surprise. It's the and sometimes it's the ha that enlightens, that you see it and you don't go, ugh, you go, ha, that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. And
I think you're right. Just the presence of Rand and Casey on stage.
Yeah, just the presence of some of our people on stage. People aren't expecting it. It's just they're not expecting it. And we, of course, that's the kind of disruption we're trying. And then we want to, after the disruption, we want to normalize we want to recalibrate the expectation and then normalize that recalibrated expectation. Yeah, I never thought I wanted to be normal, but I did, but normal on my own, terms. What's normal? Well, I live a weird life, but it's pretty normal. So what's not normal? So it's like, again, recalibrating the definition. But I love that, Chris, because that was true also in with the Austin and the Tallahassee Actual Lives. And I'll never forget when Actual Lives went to Washington, D.C. to perform at the Kennedy Center the Disability Festival. When we go down the street, people think we're a parade because there are power chairs and field chairs and crutches and people limping and and people going and signing, and it's just like, what's this? It's just that we're even, and also Chris, just the simple fact, the historical disruption of us being out in public, period. For so long in our history, in disability history, of course, we were supposed to not be seen or heard, just kind of shoved away and institutionalized or kept at home or hidden, and that history is still so recent that every time I see someone on the street who's not in theater, who's out there just going across the street in a power chair, I think, I'm so glad to see it. I'm so glad to see it. And I'm so glad that there are cuts in the street so I can see it.
I think there's a point that I'd like to make, that we've been talking about disruption, and we'll get into art as disruption, because of course that's the main thing that we're here to talk about. But I do want to make it really clear that the fact that our bodies themselves are a sign of disruption, that isn't always a positive thing. right? I remember you bring up parades. And I remember my brother Brad, who's non-disabled, he was on a soccer team in high school. And my brother Randy and I and my mom and dad went to see him play. And we had to sit in like special seats. And my brother and I are in wheelchairs. And yeah, that we had to sort of parade across the field to get to the accessible seats. And I remember moments like that in which I didn't want to be disruptive.
Yes.
Right. And it wasn't until I politically understood the power of disruption that became something that I favored. But there is a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain in that. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious. I mean, that's an interesting story in terms of you not having the choice.
Yeah.
Right. To be disruptive by your mere presence. And so I'm curious what it's like for people who have non-apparent disabilities as a whole, or a shared experience of the ways that we interpret and experience the world with a non-apparent disability are not the norm either.
I can kind of comment because I have an invisible disability, although it didn't seem that invisible to me, because it was visible. It was visible in the way I spoke, because again, I had deaf speak going up, that when and even though I have cochlear implants now, I'm very aware of that. I'm very aware of speech and what that means and what that signifies. And but so I can't speak for people. We have in our company, of course, we have about 3 or 4 people who have with high functioning autism. We have people with personality disorders. It's been very difficult for people with mental disabilities to be able to be in the company and do what they have to do, because theater is so intense. And there's not a good way to make the theatrical experience less intense. In some ways, actually, this video, this being virtual, being online, has been actually a relief to some of the people with the kind of the mental disability, because they can control the environment, they can control the interaction. People aren't breathing down their necks. There's some of that in there. But all I remember, Jill, about my own experience growing up with an invisible disability is that feeling like I didn't, like Chris, I didn't want to disrupt. I didn't want to be the one who didn't hear, and so everything had to be redone again or reset again. I didn't want to be the one that other people couldn't understand because I had such a bad lateral lisp. I didn't want to be the one who was it up. And I didn't want to be that kind of disruptor. And so, but what's interesting to me, and talking to a lot of my friends, like my, particularly in Faust, is that how some of us learn to make that twist, that disruption that humiliates us, and turn it back. Make it so we become funny. Some of us, we become the comics. We we become the aggressors. Sometimes with it, or we get, But there was something I wanted to say here, and I remember when 2 things, both in Faust and, as I say, the Austin Actual Lives and Tallahassee Actual Lives. One of the hardest things to get people up on stage, with people with disabilities up on stage, was the fact that most of their lives, they had been, the ones with visible disabilities, had been stared at. Always the question was, why do you want me to get up on stage where people are going to be staring at me again? And of course, the thing that we would say is that because you control the stare. You get to decide how they see you, and you, as Kenny Free said in that book, get to stare back. That to me was a great revelation, also to me as well. So Jill, I can't really I can't really and won't talk for people who particularly because I know that in terms of autism and in terms of mental disabilities, and also in the course of developmental disabilities, it's a different proposition there. There are different prejudices that come up. There are different difficulties, both with the medium, with the intimacy, and now of theater. So I can't comment on that, but I do understand that sometimes we can't accommodate enough. We can't accommodate the art itself. The art sometimes doesn't lend it to, in any way that we can see, it doesn't lend itself to accommodation. And therefore, and this is something that I learned when I was always so angry that, why couldn't I be in theater? Why couldn't I do it? And therefore, there is a responsibility on people with disabilities to make a new art out of that old art, one that does accommodate. And if it changes the nature of the art so that it's not recognizable to people, let it. That's the good kind of disruption, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, let's talk about two examples of disruption in both of our companies or our organizations have done, and we want to start with a parody that you folks did of the Miracle Worker, and so let's stop for a minute and take a look at that video, and then when we come back, we'll talk about that as a moment of disruption, but a very specific moment of disruption. So let's take a look at that video real quick.
A subsidiary of the Mickey Faust Alternative Performance Club and Diane Wilkins present The Sun Shines Through Trees, as a child plays in a clearing in the woods. Nearby, a rope clothesline with sheets hanging to dry. The girl tilts her face to the sky, her eyes shut. She waves her extended arms as she stumbles towards the clothesline. She feels a sheet and then moves with her hand running along the rope. The Miracle Worker. She walks between the drying sheets, grabs the edge of one and rolls herself up in it. It tightens around her, with only her legs showing beneath. She struggles, twisting herself tighter in the sheet. Inside, with her arms outstretched, she bangs into a door. Then by tapping the top of a dining table, she reaches a chair and place setting. A stern woman wearing dark sunglasses sits at the far end of the table. She watches the young girl shovel the food into her mouth with her hands. She cautiously walks around to grab food from the woman's plate. The woman grabs her hand and slaps it. She picks up a spoon and puts it in the girl's hand, who throws it down. She slaps Helen, then finger spells in her hand.
You're just a spoiled, little, deaf and blind brat, you are. B-R-A-T, brat. And I, Annie Sullivan, will not put up with it.
She grabs the spoon and shoves Helen into the chair.
You're going to sit and eat properly, you are.
Wrapping her hand around Helen's small hand with a spoon in it, Annie force feeds her. Food covers Helen's face. Annie sits down and takes a gulp of her water. Helen spits food in Annie's face. Annie spits water. She splashes the glass of water in Helen's face and finger spells in her hand.
Water. W-A-T-E-R. Water.
She dips Helen's hand in the pitcher of water, then pours it over her head.
Water.
Outside at a well, Annie pumps water over Helen's hand.
W-A Water! Water! Are you trying to be difficult? Water!
Shoves Helen's head into the stove.
Water!
In the bathroom, she repeatedly dunks Helen's head in the toilet.
Water! 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 Water!
Outside, next to a stream, a sign warning, no trespassing, contaminated area, avoid contact with soil and water. Annie drags Helen to the edge and puts her in. Annie aims a large fire hose.
Water!
The high-powered spray knocks Helen to the ground, rolling her around in the mud as Annie struggles with the powerful hose. Annie ties Helen up.
Until you get it right, you nasty little rat.
She locks her in a shed.
See ya!
A trickle of water drips on her head. Annie runs back and pulls Helen onto her knee for a hug.
Wonderful, my darling. Wonderful.
Helen smiles. Annie gets a sinister look
Now,
and holds up a hanger.
wire hanger.
Coming soon. Episode 2. Annie, dearest. The only way they learn. Next, a woman wearing black speaks as she signs to.
Hello, I'm Terry Galloway, one of the co-creators of this video parody that you just saw. But most importantly, I am an authentic deaf person. I wear count them, two very powerful digital hearing aids. And if you watch and listen closely, you'll notice I have what is called a lateral lisp. Moreover, I could share with you any number of horror stories about the misery of growing up hearing impaired. But happily, my suffering left me uniquely qualified to have conceived, co-written, and co-directed this video parody about the life of deaf, blind Patty Duke and her mentor, Anne Bancroft. Of course, Helen Keller and her mentor, Annie Sullivan. Now, I realize as an authentic deaf person, I ought to be signing this to you even as I speak. But sadly, I was mainstreamed as a child, and my sign is like my Spanish, which is crappy. But I'm able to have a signing stand-in, or hand-in. Stevie.
Stevie peeks and waves.
Now, Stevie is not herself an authentic deaf person, but simply a hearing person who signs. And according to the hierarchy of deafness, she can't even officially be in this
Stevie
video.
peeks around. Terry shakes her head no. Stevie pushes Terry off her lap, grabs her around the neck and shakes her. Shoves her around a bit more, then grabs her under the arms and starts signing again.
But perhaps that, too, is subject to interpretation.
For a full account of Terry Galloway's suffering as a hearing-impaired child and adult, send $5 plus postage and handling to Stevie, handler of all things financial pertaining to the authentic deaf person, Terry Galloway, 1402 South Meridian, Tallahassee, Florida, 32301.
Stevie, were you talking behind my back?
Stevie peeks around and shakes her head no.
Do I have any choice but to
Shakes
trust
no
you?
again.
I was afraid.
Credits starring Jesse Altomoro as Helen, Donna Marie Nutt as Annie, Terry Galloway, Stevie Fenton, and ADIV written by Terry Galloway. Produced by Diane Wilkins. Directed by Terry Galloway, Donna Marie Nutt, Diane Wilkins. Production facilities, Diane Wilkins Productions. Tallahassee, Florida. A presentation of Faust Films. A subsidiary of the Mickey Faust Alternative Performing Arts Club. Tallahassee, Florida. Copyright 2002 MFCH Incorporated.
Well, that was, you know, when I first saw that film, whew, that it's so funny and it's so biting and just. Let's start by just talking about why you made it. Let's just talk about that question first, and then we'll ask a couple other questions. But why this parody?
Tune in next week to the Gene and Dave Show for Terry's answer on Disruptions Part 2.
And can Mom afford to have help preparing her meals? We know what you're going through. AmeriGroup has a plan for people with Medicaid that helps them get the services they need to live at home. AmeriGroup. Choose us for helping your loved ones live at home. Call 1-800-964-2777.